Welcome to the first of probably many unpopular design opinions videos. If you're new here, my name is Medora. I use they, them pronouns, and I make videos about home design. Like I mentioned at the beginning of my most recent, oddly specific interior design yums video, my energy is a bit off right now. You are not imagining it. I explained a bit of the situation in the video, so go watch that if you want a little bit more context, but I will be promoting my Patreon a little bit more in the coming videos. There is a general support tier, but please no pressure, and there are also a couple tiers to get live one-on-one design sessions with me. Plus I offer design services on my website, all of which will be linked below. So, to get into my unpopular design opinions, this is a completely random list. There is no organization to it whatsoever. I didn't number this list, and I refuse to at this point. So, good luck to future editing me who has to keep track of all of that. This first one might get me some hate in the comments, but hear me out. I genuinely think that a solid white laminate countertop, like the cheap ones from IKEA, are one of the best countertop options out there. White goes with everything. They're cheap, so if you need to replace them, it's not a big deal. They're a bit more soft and gentle than tile, so I'm not concerned about setting a glass down and breaking it. They're much more durable and waterproof than butcher block. And to my knowledge, they're definitely less bad for the environment than granite and stone and similar options like that. So yeah, I definitely think that white laminate countertops are super underrated. I mentioned this in a recent video, but I'm actually not mad at an artificial plant in any variety of specific contexts. First and foremost, it needs to be good quality and look very passable as a living plant. Those assumptions aside, I understand that the prospect of spending hundreds of dollars on an 8-foot tall tree that you might not be able to keep live can be kind of intimidating. So I totally get wanting to get an artificial one that you can't kill, and then getting a few smaller living plants that aren't quite as big of a financial investment. Artificial trees also specifically make sense if you're traveling for long periods of time and you won't be home to water it, or if the specific type of tree that you want is toxic to pets or children. This next one I stole directly from Nick Lewis, but I think it bears repeating, specifically because I am such a fan of thrifting and antiquing and finding things secondhand. So just because it's old or vintage or an antique does not mean that it's good. There are plenty of things out there that would be considered vintage now, and they're just not cute in any context. So do your best to be discerning about colors, shapes, patterns, materials, and make sure what you find actually fits into what your vision for your home is. This next one has to do with dupes of popular and often expensive designs. There's two sides to this issue. Some people think that dupes are immoral, that you shouldn't rip off the design of a famous designer, and then there's the other side, which I am more aligned with, where I think it's important to remember that there are very, very different audiences for the real thing versus the dupe. People who can afford the real thing, who can afford the incredible quality, who can afford the name brand, and they want that, they're going to buy the real thing. They're not going to consider a dupe when they know that the real thing is much higher quality. On the other hand, people who are buying the dupe are buying it specifically because they want the general look, but they just don't have the money. And at that price point, sometimes you can't be caring about quality. The same principle holds true in fashion, where we see expensive designers coming out with things, and then we see TikTok ads of incredibly cheap dupes. What's important to remember here is that a lot of this, whether we're thinking this consciously or not, is about trying to look higher class than we currently are, which in the age of mass marketing can be achieved through the use of shapes and colors and proportions and things like that, rather than relying on a high material cost to be the only indicator of wealth. Some dupes are so low quality or so popular that I don't think it's worth it, but if the design is good and it genuinely adds to your space in a very specific way, just let it be good. I recently did a thrifted virtual makeover where I ended up choosing a knockoff of a very popular chair, and while I do think that that design is a little bit overused, it added to the space in very specific ways. I really liked the black and the chrome specifically, and if you want to go check out that video, I will link it somewhere. I am not a big fan of legs on furniture in general, and specifically furniture that's meant to look light and airy. Sometimes they're necessary, but especially with dressers and couches, I really love a chunky base, and for tables I love a pedestal base. In general, the less legs, the better. I mentioned this specifically about dining tables in one of my recent videos, but you know those scenes in like 90s rom-coms where the girl stops by the guy's office and like, you know, to drop off lunch or whatever, and she closes the door, and then the dude just like shoves everything off of the desk, and they immediately, you know, start doing the thing. I'm personally somewhere on the ace spectrum, so I'm probably never going to do that, but I want my furniture to look like it's sturdy enough to handle that situation. In general, I really love color drenching, where you paint the walls and the trim and the doors and the ceiling of a room all the same color, except for in kitchens. Specifically when the upper cabinets and the lower cabinets are the same color. I also think it really makes a lot of sense, based on how humans have evolved, to have the lower cabinets be a darker color and the upper cabinets be a lighter color, because, at least in my mind, it kind of mimics a landscape, where the earth is darker and the sky is usually lighter. I don't know if there's actually any like scientific basis in that, but that's how I tend to think of it. I feel like casually undone spaces have been having a moment recently, which I've absolutely been loving. But I also really want to draw attention to spaces that have so much thoughtful attention to detail, but it doesn't look like it on first glance. One really good example of this is this bathroom vanity tile job. It looks very simple on first glance, but whoever did this had to pick the tile and the pattern before they even put their walls up, so that they could measure exactly how wide the counter needs to be. And from there, they would need to measure how far apart the walls need to be, and they would also need to take in consideration the depth of the drywall. Every once in a while, you will come across a happy accident that just fits perfectly, but this specific sink area was designed so precisely for this specific tile, which I just appreciate so much. Especially for those of us living in relatively small spaces, I'd be willing to bet that your furniture is actually too small, and that the room would look a lot bigger and less crowded and cramped and claustrophobic and cluttered if you had less furniture that is significantly larger. I'll pop up some examples of living rooms because I think that's one of the easiest ways to see that one really large sectional is generally a lot better than like a couch and a love seat and a chair and like, you know, a bunch of random little things. There's really nothing wrong with having a simple or basic interior design style, as long as you do it well. You really don't need all of the new and trendy or like impossible to find funky objects for your home if that doesn't feel right to you. I do personally love something that's interesting and unique, but I also just love a warm white wall with wood baseboards and window trim. This one also might get some strong opinions down in the comments, but I do genuinely believe that downsizing, decluttering, and organizing well / making sure that everything has a dedicated home, and then actually developing practices to put things back in their homes will do 10 times more for having a home that feels put together and designed, rather than buying that new lamp or that new couch or whatever. At least 85% of the time, you do need a rug, and it needs to be bigger than you think, but sometimes you really only need a small rug or even no rug. But in this case, it does have to be a beautiful, high-quality rug. For example, sometimes having a small rug under your coffee table just to act as a transition into the floor actually makes a lot more sense than having a giant rug covering the entire floor. Another example is just having runners on either side of your bed instead of a giant 8x10 or 9x12. This one might put me in some hot water, but not every window needs curtains or even window treatments at all. If you feel like you really need the privacy, then absolutely go for it. But I'd rather have a window with no window covering rather than a bad window covering, right? Something that I think is pretty underrated and has not been... Something that I think is underrated, specifically because it has been not very well executed in the past, specifically on wallpaper, tile, fabrics, rugs, etc. They can look really outdated if you pick an outdated one, but they can also look really cool and fresh and unique. And I think that borders in general, whether it's something more intricate or it's just a simple, slightly darker line of trim or something like that, it really helps define a space. And I tend to think of it like eyeliner. And then my last unpopular design opinion for this video is that yes, neutral colors are safer, but they're also much harder to get right. It's so much easier to pick out a color from the rainbow rather than trying to get the right beige or white. And that is my chaotic, unnumbered, very unorganized list of unpopular design opinions. Remember to check out my Patreon and let me know if I missed any of your favorite unpopular design opinions down below.